Everyone, thank you for showing up for our session on regulating propaganda. We are super happy to have our four speakers with us. The order will be a bit different because we are going to live stream the first session and then switch it off for our two others paper. So we're going first with Michael. Michael Karanicolas, we are very happy to have you here. You are an affiliated fellow with the ISP, our very own ISP, and also the executive director of the UCLA Institute for Technology, Law and Policy. And Michael is going to present a paper which short title was Combating Metaganda. And I will leave the floor to you, Michael.
Am I about 15 minutes?
Yes, 15 minutes.
And does this work? Nice. Thanks very much to Yale ISP for this invitation and to Chinmay and Salwa for their incredible work organizing this convening. Anybody who's organized this, these kinds of things knows there's a huge amount of work and stress that goes into this, and I'm enormously grateful for this opportunity, as well as for the work that's gone into this. My name is Michael Karanicolas. I'm the executive director of the UCLA Institute for Technology, Law and Policy, which is a new-ish institute. It's a collaboration between the School of Law and the School of Engineering. I've been the executive director the inaugural executive director for about 3 years, building this institute as an interdisciplinary tech policy program. The focus of my paper is on extended reality, or XR. It's gone through a few different iterations as far as names go. XR is, and just as a bit of background, XR is an umbrella term for technologies which are best understood through their capacity to offer deeper and more realistic ways to engage with information systems. The best known of these is probably VR, or virtual reality, where the user is placed inside of an interactive virtual environment through use of a wearable interface, like the Oculus Quest, which is now the Meta Quest, or the Apple Vision Pro is the latest technology which has been making waves on that front. I realize that for some, the metaverse has become a bit of a running joke. I was recently asked to review a paper by a colleague, and it included like a throwaway line about how some technologies take off and others end up as dead as the metaverse. And as someone who was at that time about 8,000 words into writing a paper on it, that line cut a bit deep. But it's clear that this technology is coming. This is not where technology ends. Our engagement, our interface with the information society is going to migrate to something that's more integrated into our persons, that's more accessible. It's going to become the default engagement with the information society and the world at large. Might not be for 6 months, might not be for a year, might not be for 5 years, but that is the direction that technology is going in. And these technologies have an incredible amount of potential. Early investment, for predictable reasons, has focused on gaming, but there are also interesting applications related to employment training, simulations for airline pilots or surgeons. One of my favorite applications of these technologies is they have for social workers making home visits to simulate what it's like to try to have a sensitive, direct conversation about delicate subjects with somebody while there's like a dog barking in your other ear, or like a kid screaming in the background. So there's interesting simulation functions. There's interesting functions in support of diversity, equity, and inclusion in terms of allowing people to experience life as a day in the life of a person who's a different gender, a different social group, a different race. There's all kinds of accessibility opportunities in terms of supporting folks that are hard of hearing or have other disabilities. Marianne Franks has a paper from, I think, 3 or 4 years ago that really expresses all the positive potentialities of this. And this is all the tip of the iceberg. However, once you introduce humans into the equation, problems always follow. This is the universal rule of online platforms and user-generated content. As soon as social VR was rolled out, groping and sexual harassment became an immediate problem. And for anybody that studied content moderation, that's the least surprising development ever, is that's going to immediately become a problem. In January, UK police launched their first investigation over a sexual assault that took place in the metaverse. Britton Heller, who's a scholar at Stanford and a former prosecutor who's written extensively about XR and social and political implications of it, has mentioned that when she speaks to victims of sexual assault in virtual reality, they present the same symptoms. They present the same indicators as folks that have gone through those experiences in the real world. And thinking ahead, there are a range of other content challenges that are likely to manifest over time, mirroring the experience of social media platforms. There's been some interesting writing, including by Jack Balkin, I think about 15 or 20 years ago, was writing about this. Because anytime there's a new transformational technology that we're just starting to think about, obviously Jack was writing about it decades ago. But there's also a more recent paper by Mark Lemley and Eugene Volokh talking about interesting questions around defamation in the metaverse. But what I'm particularly interested in, and what I think is most relevant to folks in the context of this conference, is its potential as a vector for propaganda and hate speech. And it is an incredibly powerful tool for propaganda as a result of the immersive nature of the user experience and the visceral way that you feel what's going on and what you see and feel in the metaverse. So imagine you're in an experience where you're standing in a room and in front of you is a realistic 3D rendering of Joe Biden. And then that avatar turns around and it starts beating a family member of yours, again, convincingly rendered, starts beating a family member of yours to death. Images on screen, this is what Joe Biden is doing to America, vote Trump. Now imagine something similar being done where the rendering is of an undocumented Central American migrant, or a rendering of a trans youth sexually assaulting your daughter, or an avatar that looks exactly like your daughter. The potential for customized and convincing propaganda is virtually unlimited. And even if you know it's a simulation, even if there's a warning label on it that says this is not real life, the way the technology is designed means what you see is going to impact you in a very similar way to if you saw it in the real world. And the reason for that, there are a few different reasons for that. One is that these technologies' invocation of spatial and direct memory means that users retain immersive technology experiences more powerfully. They create stronger convictions than just watching something on a screen. And their efficacy is further amplified because some of these technologies are equipped to monitor your heart rate, monitor your pupil dilation, monitor your reactions, to render everything in a more convincing way. And the idea is to make it maximally persuasive and immersive, but therein lies the danger when you're dealing with a propaganda experience, is it's maximally impactful. And the other problem, and the reason why I wanted to focus on this issue, is that in addition to these compounded harms, the tools to moderate VR effectively at scale, to moderate social VR effectively at scale, currently do not exist and are not expected anytime soon. So if you think about the way that platforms already struggle with moderating real-time video, that moderation paradigm is vastly more difficult in VR or XR as a result of the three-dimensional and multifaceted nature of the world and the heavily contextual nature of the interactions, right? A lot of people are thinking about these virtual worlds as if it's analogous to social media. It is absolutely not. It is fundamentally different from social media as we understand it today. There is a radically different speech dynamic. So a better analogy in terms of the content moderation paradigm than thinking about Facebook is imagine trying to moderate, but the challenges in moderating behavior in a crowded bar with an unlimited number of rooms. And as a result of these challenges, there is currently a very heavy reliance on human moderators, volunteer moderators. And so long as XR remains on the relative fringes, that's fine. In 2022, there was about 9 million of these headsets sold. But if and when growth accelerates, and this becomes the default model of engagement with the online world, that's going to be a real problem, because the moderation capabilities for these technologies are essentially back where we were in 2010, even though the regulatory and business environment for content moderation has changed enormously over the past decade. There are very different expectations from the public, from governments, both in terms of informal expectations as well as legal standards, all of which have been crafted around traditional social media platforms and which don't port neatly into this context. So my paper notes these differences and the regulatory delta that is emerging. I think through some of the potential solutions. One is that the custodians of virtual worlds will just do everything they can to avoid any political or controversial content entirely. This is what Roblox has done, where you're essentially not allowed to talk about politics on the platform because they just don't want the headache. There's a strong incentive in this direction. I think that's a problem for society and for democracy. If these platforms become our default place of engagement, if they become the agora, the forum, I think that it's a problem if there's no news or political content there entirely, right? A second option is to enable community-based moderation. Platforms love this idea, right? Everybody wants to be Wikipedia, because it's nice and cheap, it offloads responsibility onto your user base, and it offloads the accountability onto your user base as well. Meta has been trying this model, but of course, these systems are incredibly difficult to set up and maintain, as Wikipedia can tell you, where they spend a whole lot of their time and energy trying to keep their community on side. Same thing is true for Reddit. So I think that that's an option, but that's not likely to be feasible. And so ultimately, what I'm struggling with is this presents us with an opportunity, and this is sort of where I'm ending up with the paper, and where I'm not sure how to sort of finalize it. There's been a lot of discussion about in this both here and broader content moderation discussions about the relationship between architecture and speech. Right? There's all kinds of ways that this applies to the metaverse, all kinds of ways that design decisions impact speech. And what's interesting here is there's an opportunity before mass adoption of these technologies to build a better enabling environment from the ground up, to learn from our experiences with social media and start with a blank slate and ask, what does it mean to create a positive speech environment, and what are the values that we should be aiming for, and what are the standards that we should impose, and how should we impose them on the custodians of these new virtual worlds to create a better way for people to interact. I'm still kind of grappling with how the broader speech questions apply to this environment. Would very much welcome discussion of that, and would very much welcome ideas about what I should say in this paper. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Michael.